Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Al Smith from Vesta Health Systems in Vancouver, Canada. And I have the unique pleasure this afternoon of interviewing Dr. Larry Brilliant. Larry is an esteemed medical professional, and most medical professionals deal with the individual, and Larry deals in an extensive way with populations as an epidemiologist, and he has an incredible CV, but I'm going to just point out one thing, is that Larry's the chair of the National Biosurveillance Advisory Committee, so he's at the choke point of information in this pandemic. So just like to welcome you, Larry, and thank you very much. The first question is, where are we in the WHO staging numerics, and what do you see happening over the next little while?
Well, hello, everybody. So we're used to Category 5 hurricanes, and we've all got this image in our brain of watching Katrina as it moved inexorably towards New Orleans. And the WHO system isn't like that, so I should start off by saying that. The WHO system, at which we are Category 5, on a system that has a total of 6 categories. The first several categories are, is the virus fit for humans? Is the virus able to infect humans? And is it able to go from human to human? And then is it able to go from human to human to human? That's the first 4. And the next 2 are how widely spread is the pandemic, and we're at stage 5. Technically, we should already be at stage 6. By the definition of the number of countries, the number of continents, we are at stage 6. WHO has been under political pressure to downgrade or to postpone that statement because they realize now that there's nothing in that categorization that says virulence or a case fatality rate or how bad is it. So you could have a mild pandemic that affected lots of states and get to Category 6, and a pandemic that affected only 20 countries and killed everybody and still be at Category 4. So the system needs some tweaking. Okay. We are Category 5. We will certainly be at Category 6. We really technically are already at Category 6.
Great. A lot of this is about the numbers. Can you talk about the numerators, the denominators, the quality of the numbers, projections, all the stuff you
Well, we were talking at lunch, and you're a statistician. You come from a family of statisticians in forestry, and the numerators and the denominators are quite important, and they will lead to an understanding of what happened in Mexico. The denominator is the number of cases that we're interested in, but there's even a denominator beyond that, which is the number of people, and how many people in a population have the disease, don't. That's the attack rate. When the denominator is the population and the numerator is the number of cases, that's the attack rate. And then when the denominator is the number of cases and the numerator is the number of deaths, that's the fatality rate, or the case fatality rate. Now, all of these are fraught with errors. There's the risk of false positives, risk of false negatives, under-reporting, weak surveillance systems. So as of today, in the United States, as of this morning, and I attend, as I told you, a 5 a.m., 3-day-a-week conference call that CDC hosts on a kind of status report. As of this morning, there are 10 deaths in the United States and a reported 6,300 cases, so roughly 1 death per 1,000 cases. But the problem with that is there's probably between 10 and 100 cases for every one that's reported. And even that number will change over the course of a pandemic. So let's just get some ideas about numbers. Death is a terrible thing to say. Death is a hard endpoint. It's a hard number. You'll always capture the deaths. So your numerator in the death rate will be pretty accurate. The number of cases early on in a pandemic is terrible. You're always wrong because you miss most of them. And then at some point, you start getting them all. And then at some point, you realize it doesn't matter anymore. And you don't have to do tests anymore. Because if anyone looks like they have symptoms that look like that with the pandemic, you're going to treat them anyway. So those various ratios change over time. So right now we're dealing with a disease that has a case fatality rate of under 1%, certainly. And it probably has an attack rate estimated over its lifetime of about 20 to 25%. So the modeling done by Neil Ferguson from Imperial College tends to suggest that over the course of the lifetime of this pandemic, a fifth to a quarter of everyone in the world will get it. And that's what makes it a pandemic. That doesn't make it a bad disease if you're dealing with small numbers of deaths, low number of days of missed work. But then you have to layer onto that the grave uncertainty we have about how it's going to behave. And we can talk a little bit about the virus itself, because it's a strange virus behaving strangely.
Absolutely.
So I'm not going to be able to be either reassuring, nor should I be alarmist. There's so much uncertainty in this virus. But right now, that's the status of it.
Okay. You, in your Wall Street Journal article, you referred to Sherry Cooper's estimate of $1 trillion GDP loss. And you also talk a lot of the climate change overlay, ecological islands, the deforestation, getting rid of buffers, exposing million virus inventories. A lot of it appears as though a lot of the financial loss and the conservation aspect of getting rid of the challenge in Africa with bushmeat consumption and things like that could be congruent. Do you think the world will ever get that message, and do you think it'll ever be driven by the economics?
You know, as we are at FiRe, and the business of FiRe, Future in Review, is predicting the future and going back, I predicted this pandemic 5 years ago, and I called together a group of the smartest people I could find, and we had a meeting called Pan Defense, and the first person I called was Mark Anderson, who I'm pleased to tell you came to that meeting, and Sherry Cooper, who was the chief economist of the Bank of Montreal, also came. And the consensus estimate of the epidemiologists in that room was that there would be, within 10 years, a 10% chance of a pandemic that would kill over 10 million people. So what is a 10% chance of 10 million people dying? It's a net present value of 1 million. I don't know how you use numbers like that, but I will tell you that the scientist who has the 3 greatest titles in the world, I think, Lord Martin Rees, who's the Queen's astronomer, the master of Trinity College in Cambridge, God bless you, and the president of the Royal Society, he has placed a $1,000 bet that there will be a pandemic or a deliberate introduction of a pathogen that will kill over 100 million people in the next 5 years.
Oh my gosh. So
there is enough concern about these issues that when bird flu, remember bird flu? When bird flu killed 200 people and had a case fatality rate of closer to 50%, we were quite worried. But even bird flu or swine flu, they don't kill as many people as the ordinary flu. Every year, 35,000 Americans and 350,000 people around the world die of ordinary flu. That's a pandemic too. Every year we have a pandemic. But the fluologists like to reserve the word pandemic, and properly so, for an unusual occurrence, and seasonal influenza is usual. I am very concerned that we will be, that modernity is moving us into a world in which we share with birds and animals each other's viral chatter, you know? And the intelligence community uses that term chatter to talk about what they pick up on NASA's audioscopes. But if you had a genomic scope and you could measure the chatter that went on between monkeys and chimpanzees and humans, we would have found HIV/AIDS not in 1980, when we thought it started, not in 1959, when we thought we found the first cases, but back in 1929, where we've now found frozen samples. So we know it goes back at least to that, and probably back to 9. It's probably been around that long. And as we move into a world, and Sid is here, you know, China 30 years ago had a population of about 1 billion people. Now it's about 1.35 or 1.4, about 35% growth. But in that same period, the number of chickens have grown from 15 or 16 million to 15 billion. And animals and humans, chickens and pigs in China and Laos and all over the Mekong, when you eat a pig, what's left over is cut up. It's called rendering, and it's fed to the chickens. When you eat a chicken, what's left over is cut up, and it's chopped up, it's rendered and fed to pigs. It's like a science experiment. You couldn't create better environments for the movement of these viruses back and forth. So I'm very concerned in general. I don't know how concerned to be about this pandemic. It has some characteristics that are reassuring. It has some characteristics that are extraordinarily nerve-wracking.
Getting to the specifics about this pandemic, it appears to be deviating from the W-shaped curve that you typically see in a pandemic in terms of age demographics. And if concurrently, maybe you could discuss that and talk about what individual people can do in this circumstance.
Is Ricardo here? Ricardo, you and I had this conversation a little earlier, and I wanted to say, I think Mexico has behaved impeccably in this pandemic. The Europeans are calling this the Mexican flu. I think that's a moral error. I think it is scientifically inaccurate. But it's not without historical precedent, which is going to get us to the shape of the curve. In 1917, when we had the largest pandemic on record, the swine flu pandemic, also known as the Spanish flu, the reason it was called the Spanish flu is because it was the First World War and every other country was at war. It had military censorship, and you never want your enemy to know that your army is weakened with a disease, so military censorship required everyone to suppress the cases. The only country not at war was the neutral country, Spain. They had no problem releasing the data. In fact, the Spanish flu began in the United States, probably in Minnesota. The fact that Mexico was so forthcoming with the data is a tribute to the Mexican healthcare system, and the rest of the world owes Mexico a debt of gratitude. Now, what happened is that Mexico reported more deaths and attributed them to swine flu than probably actually were caused by swine flu. So they inflated the numerator, and they didn't get all the cases, so the denominator appeared to be lower, giving an appearance of a higher case fatality rate. That's what made people so alarmed early on. And the second part of that was the shape of the curve. Because in seasonal flu, if this is the number of deaths by age, we're used to seeing infants and the elderly die of normal seasonal flu. During the Spanish flu, or the swine flu epidemic of 1918, I don't want to commit the same mistake, we had a W-shaped curve, a death rate curve, where the maximum number of people who were dying were 20 to 40 years old. And that is because of something called cytokine storm. It's a feature of the way the immune system reacts to that particular kind of virus. The first reports from Mexico showed a classic W-shaped death curve. That frightened people. In fact, the data from Mexico was correct that we have an unusual number of young people dying from this disease. It should be and is alarming. But we don't have people dying over the age of 50. And we have some. But the curve is actually neither U nor W. It's more like this. And probably that's because, we don't know, probably because of the last swine flu scare in the US, 1975, when 50 million Americans were vaccinated against H1N1 because one soldier died at Fort Dix. So at the time, the economic activity of inoculating everyone was pretty well a problem, but it turns out it was a pretty good investment. In retrospect. Yeah. At the time, it created problems. You may remember with Guillain-Barré's and other adverse reactions, but it seems to be that either that round of vaccination or other seasonal flus that had antigens like the H1N1 and have conferred some immunity on I won't say over 50 as elderly, but that population.
Okay. 2 years for me.
Population of a certain age have certain amounts of protection.
So what can the individual do, Larry?
So could I just see, by a raise of hands, how many of you have been vaccinated against pneumonia? So you might consider that. Usually when you're traveling abroad and you're of a certain age, you're recommended to be vaccinated against pneumonia. About 40% of deaths from swine flu, bird flu, every flu is from pneumonia. And if you're vaccinated against one of the principal causes of pneumonia, that works in your favor.
And children can get the vaccination as well?
Yes, yes. Usually you don't recommend that, but for this particular period of time, everyone should speak to your individual doctor, of course, and get advice on that. So we're talking now about mitigating the effects of the disease first, and then we'll talk about preventing the spread of the disease. May I see a show of hands? How many are taking statins? Quite a few. Well, good for you, because it turns out that statins are highly anti-inflammatory, and that even though their primary purpose is reducing lipids, their secondary purpose is to reduce inflammation of many kinds, and there's probably a positive effect in reducing adverse reactions to this flu from taking statins. Whether you should take statins just for the flu or not, I'm not saying. That's between you and your doctor. I think general health, I think lots of sleep, I think not putting yourself in a period of stress or vulnerability. I think keeping children and adults home when they are sick is just good manners, let alone good public health. I think hand washing is something that everyone must do, although I must tell you that the data is much stronger about the value of hand washing in hospitals by doctors to prevent all bacterial diseases than it is for viruses of this kind. WHO has introduced 2 unique acrobatic moves. You may have seen them. They are recommending no handshaking, but the chicken
chicken, there we go.
And they are recommending that
Seen
when you
first
sneeze,
here, of course.
you sneeze in your other armpit. So if you think about this kind of a move, these are the current recommendations. They're not going to do you any harm unless you're photographed live.
That's right.
But there's a lot of other things that are general preventive medicine. And most important, I think, is we're in pretty good shape, both in this country and globally. Globally, because 3 years ago we passed the International Health Regulations, which requires every country to report the cases of any disease of potential global significance. That's why Mexico followed its agreement. 190 countries, including the United States, are signatories to that agreement. I think we're in very good shape in the US because the scare of bird flu 4 years ago caused us to have 10 top exercises and simulations all throughout the United States at county and at state and at national level. So we really did have a plan on the shelf that we could take out. The federal government released 25% of its Tamiflu and Relenza store. These are the 2 antivirals. That was exactly the right thing to do.
It's actually kind of shocking given the lack of emergency planning for financial systems, how well this has gone.
It's true.
Yeah. It appears as though the media has done not a very good job of explaining this, and as it's basically almost like following the Dow Jones. You know, it's great news one day, bad news the next day. No one knows really what's going on. What's your opinion on that?
I actually don't fault the media. I normally would, but I think the media has been pretty good. The problem isn't the media. The problem is the facts keep changing.
Okay.
And we live in a just-in-time information society, not just a just-in-time inventory system. And as the facts change, they are broadcast immediately by Twitter or Facebook or online. Yeah. And then the more conventional media has to catch up with that, and they report what has just come out. So when we first thought that the disease in Mexico had a very, very high case fatality rate, had a W-shaped curve, and was spreading like wildfire, the media's response was reasonable. it was unreasonable to call it the Mexican flu. It was unreasonable to not understand that Mexico reporting was an act of kindness on Mexico's part, because many, many countries would have suppressed it.
Yes.
That part was wrong. But, I guess the factual part of the media reporting, I don't have a problem with.
Okay.
The innuendo, perhaps, has been wrong.
Okay. There's an ecological term called carrying capacity. It refers to the maximum number of organisms a particular island or the Earth can safely inhabit. Has this got anything to do with reaching carrying capacity? It's almost a religious question, Larry.
I don't think for this particular pandemic so much. It's like asking, was Hurricane Katrina caused by global warming, when the right question is, will global weirding, a better term than global warming, cause bad hurricanes? I think that Paul Ehrlich, 30, 40 years ago, wrote The Population Bomb, 1965. Yeah. He predicted that by today we would have 10 billion people and we would face a Malthusian shortage of food because the carrying capacity of the Earth to produce the food would be gone. In fact, we've had a green revolution in India, and we're 6.7 billion today, but we eat like we were 20 billion. Yeah. So it's our ecological footprint, it's our carbon footprint, more than it is our numbers, I think. I think the carrying capacity idea is inadequate. I think it's good, but not sufficient, because it's the consumption pattern more than just the head count.
Absolutely.
But I definitely think that we're running out of resources. Sid will tell you that when he was living in captivity in China, the water table, the aquifer under Beijing, was only 10 foot down. It's 285 feet down now, and you get down 300 plus feet, you're at pure salt. You can go to visit lots of cities in India from the 10th and 11th century that were abandoned before they were occupied because the river changed course or the aquifer dried up. We're running into situations like that now.
Well, thank you very much. We wanted to allot ample time for questions from the audience because it's such a personal issue, so I think we'll be doing that right now. Sir. Oh, here we go.
Hi. There's a study that was done by Tom Reichert, who used to be the head of research for Becton Dickinson, and he retired and came out and did a study in which he was convinced that the single most important step towards health that any government could take was to make sure that everybody was vaccinated. It drew heavily on a natural sort of experiment which occurred in Japan, in which the Japanese were for a while vaccinating everybody. They followed it down the line for 10 years, found that it really didn't seem to be helping, and they stopped it, whereupon then he looked farther, I think, to 20 years and discovered, my God, that's when the deaths begin, not after 10, but 20 years. And that's where his conclusion comes from. Is that all true? Because I've never heard more about it.
It's absolutely true. I think that vaccines are the greatest cost benefit in human history. It tears me up to meet parents of autistic kids who are arguing not to have their kids or other kids vaccinated. Last year, there was the son of a chiropractor who died of pertussis, whooping cough, because his father didn't believe in vaccination. It's the best investment that we've ever made. It's not just a great investment for public health, and the Gates Foundation and Bill was presented with a set of data that showed, and he was challenged, can you find a better investment than childhood vaccination? He couldn't. That's why the Gates Foundation became so heavily involved in childhood vaccination. But it's not just a great investment because it reduces infant mortality, it reduces childhood mortality, it increases longevity. It also reduces the birth rate. So if you vaccinate everyone and the kids don't die, parents don't feel the need to have replacement births, insurance births, lottery births. And as the security that you have that your children are going to live past the age of 5 increases, then the fertility rates go down dramatically. And so it's also the best way to control a population is actually to make it a healthy population. After we eradicated smallpox, I came back to the United States and I was met with incredulous, ridiculous comments. Like people said, well, you've just made it possible for more people to live and there'll be a greater burden in poor countries. It's actually the opposite. The eradication of smallpox. Smallpox killed 500 million people, 500 million people in the 20th century. But by stopping smallpox, we've reduced the birth rate by at least 1 or 2 percentage points worldwide. And vaccination rates, which were 20% 30 years ago, are 80% today. And we're seeing the same effect. Birth rates are going down where vaccination rates go up. Best investment in history, in my opinion.
Are there more questions? Well, I think I'll pick up if that's the case.
Okay.
We talked about the respect I have for your field because it's a combination of quantitative methods and medicine. I'm just wondering, you're taught in communication, you're taught in quantitative methods medicine. Was there any hole in your education that you would have liked to have filled for what you ended up doing, Larry?
Yeah, I wish I had studied molecular genetics.
Really?
Yeah, I wish I understood genomics, and I wish the science had progressed.
Yes.
I wish I'd been born later. I mean, it's so exciting right now. What we're going to be able to do with molecular epidemiology and genomic epidemiology as these new fields are being renamed is so exciting to me. When someone up here, I think from Complete Genomics, was talking about personalized medicine, last year in the United States, there were 100 million advanced imaging tests done. So that's, your CAT scan, your PET scan, your MRI, at an average cost of $2,500 each. When you get your complete genome decoded for under $1,000, you think that there would be less than 100 million? Probably not. When you have huge numbers like that and the metadata that goes along with it, height, weight, athletic prowess, and the normative data, disease proclivity, life cycle of health care, and genetic patterns, we're going to be able to find out so much more about the mystery of life and the mystery of nature, nurture. It would be really wonderful to be able to apply both epidemiological tools and genomic tools.
You probably would have stayed in school for 20 years on that.
I'd still be there.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Well, thank you very much, Larry. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.